Welcome to another episode of the Virginia Investor Podcast. Today, we have guest Rick Thompson, a real estate investor and a hard money lender who spent 13 years in special operations, 26 years total federal service. Rick, I am excited. If anyone knows me, they know I'm excited to have this conversation. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I look forward to learning more about you, your childhood upbringing, and go from there.
Thank you, Stephen.
It's great to have you here. Thanks for making the journey from Fredericksburg. I want to learn, I've seen you in all these groups, these networking events, seen the people that you surround yourself with, and I've always been impressed with how you carry yourself, the network that you have, and I would love to learn how all that started, like where it came from, how you got, into this community. Let's start with where you're born. How'd you grow up? What was life like?
Yeah, I grew up in north central Pennsylvania, very rural town. 1,000 people, kindergarten through 12th, one building, graduated 28 people in my high school class. So
it's crazy.
Very sort of outdoorsy upbringing, hunting, fishing, riding motorcycles in the mountains, that sort of
Awesome.
way of life.
What did your parents do for a living?
My parents were both school teachers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any siblings?
Yep, 2 older sisters. Yeah.
Okay. Did you play sports?
I did. Yeah, we were a pretty athletic family, so I played every sport I could pretty much play. I played. We didn't have a football team because we were too small, but everything else, I played.
So I grew up around this area, obviously, like around Richmond. There's plenty of people here. What was it like growing up in such a small community? I assume at the time you didn't know any different. You just knew everyone, and that's what it was.
Yeah. So, in a community like that, everybody knows everybody. There's very few secrets, and it's very hard to kind of grow up as a teenager and get away with things. But looking back on it, it was the best way to grow up. I wouldn't have changed anything about it. I think at the time I didn't like it. I wanted more opportunities around me. We didn't have 24-hour stores. We didn't have a McDonald's. We didn't, the closest hospital, McDonald's movie theater was 30 miles away. So
Right.
I think I was a junior in high school. We got a Sheetz.
Oh, nice.
30 miles away.
Nice.
So now at 11 o'clock at night, we could go get hot dogs, and that
Yeah.
was pretty exciting to us. So we didn't have any of that in my town. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. Did you travel at all as a kid? Like, did you get out of that town and see other places?
I mean, our parents took us on, summer vacations, things like that. So we'd go to the beaches or whatever, but, I wasn't like a worldwide traveler. I didn't, we got to travel across the country, pulling a trailer. We went from, Pennsylvania to California and back. So got to see a lot of states and a lot of the, national parks and things like that as a young kid.
That's awesome. Were you focused on academics at all when you were a kid? Like, were you focused on your grades, doing really well? Were you driven towards any particular ambitions?
Initially, no. I was a little bit of a rebel as a kid, and grades were not my thing. But, around probably my junior year of high school, I really got laser focused on what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. And I just really started focusing at that point on grades because I knew that I wanted to go to college to get, down the road to where I wanted to be.
So was that the military, that goal of yours, to join the military or to serve in some capacity?
Yeah. My goal was always to serve the country somehow. Mm-hmm. And I knew that the military was going to be a big part of that. But like really my goal, even as a junior in high school, was probably to get, either to the CIA, to the FBI, so something like that later in life. And I knew that the military was going to be a stepping stone for me to get there.
Did you have an influence, like a cool movie that you watched or a cool book that you read or something like that put this concept in your head?
I guess when I was a kid, there were all kinds of cool movies,
Yeah, of course.
Rambo, all the Chuck Norris stuff,
Yeah.
But I wouldn't say they were really what, sort of made me want to serve. I think, the national anthem to this day brings chills to my body.
Yeah.
And just seeing veterans come home in my town, they were always, welcomed back from wherever they were. And I just got this sense of service, and that's just what I wanted to do.
What did your parents think about that?
My parents were always supportive, but they certainly wanted me to take certain routes, right? My mom wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Of course.
My dad, he just didn't want me to, he wanted me to make the best out of it. So if I was going to go into the military, he was always encouraging me, go to college first, become an officer, go that route. And, but they were both always supportive.
Right. And I guess if you had further ambitions after the military, that college experience is very important. Like, you need that degree, right?
Right.
There was no question whether you're going to college, right? Like, you knew you were going to go to college to get that degree, or did part of you want to just go ahead and jump in the military?
I think I knew I had to go to college. And growing up, like my family with two school teachers back in the, 80s, college was sort of like, it was the path for us, right? And my parents, that was one of the teachings that we got growing up was that, you're going to get good grades, go to college, graduate, get a good job, get married, have kids, right? That was just sort of the path. And so college was kind of, pushed on us at a young age.
Were you training at this point? Like you mentioned your junior year, roughly, you had decided you were going to go that route, or that was your ambition. Did you start physical training and like preparing for it? Any like sort of mental training, or were you just, that's what you're going to do? Let's get good grades. Let's focus on college first.
Yeah. And in high school, I was just, I was an athlete. So I tried to stay, we were playing sports year round pretty much. So I stayed in decent shape, but I was never, the fastest or the strongest.
Right.
But I was in okay shape.
Right. Yeah, which is a good place to be, I guess. Because usually if you're the fastest, you might not be the strongest. Like being okay at everything is not a bad place to be.
I was always kind of a big guy, and I think I had strength that a lot of others didn't have. And, and like later on in life in the military and in certain selection schools and things like that, that certainly came to be my strength. I could walk a long ways with a lot of weight on my back, and a lot of other people just can't do that. So that became one of my strengths.
Yeah, it's interesting when I was hanging around those communities or knew people in those communities in the military. You would think that everyone there is just massive and jacked, but there are some guys that were, probably like 5 foot flat. That just absolutely got after it. And then there were some monsters, some really big monsters.
It's a good mix of people.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess that's what makes a good team, right?
That's right.
So they have different capabilities. So eventually you need to go to college, which is not likely to be in your small town. Right. What was that like for you?
I decided to go to the University of Pittsburgh, which was a bit crazy to initially start because I went from this 1,000-person town to the center of a massive city and a massive university, and it was just culture shock from day one. It was different people I've never seen before, wearing different clothes I've never seen before, speaking different languages I've never heard before. So it was a very eye-opening experience for me, but in the long run it was awesome. Really.
Did you have to like change who you were to an extent, or how you lived day to day, or how you kind of operated to fit in and kind of understand how to act in that environment?
I would say no. I don't feel like I had to change, but I think it does change you some way. But I was just glad to get out of a small town where everybody knew everything and to go somewhere and just become a number. Right. Like, and that's what I was. Like, I would walk into lecture halls with 600 people in them, and that just amazed me that I was going to a class with 600 people in a lecture hall. Yeah. And I liked that. I liked being just a number in a sea of numbers. So it was a big change.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever really thought about that. In a small town, you can't hide. Right. And like on days, not that you necessarily would want to hide out your whole life, but like on days where you might just want to hide. You just might not want the attention. You just might want to kind of like go in the shadows for a little bit. You're probably not able to. That room that you were in was almost the size of your whole town growing up. Right.
You're absolutely right. And I don't think it was just about hiding, but I also wanted to challenge myself and see, like, can I compete? Like, I can compete in a town of 1,000 people. Right. Can I compete in this world of thousands of, people?
Did you play any sports or anything like that in college?
No.
Okay. Did anything surprise you that, like, once you're around a lot more people, you found that they were much more capable? I don't know if you would have seen that if you weren't in sports, but, like, I could imagine, what I'm getting at is I can imagine you could be the all-star of your high school, whatever, sports team, and then you get, out and you're kind of out in this real world. But same with grades, same with different things, like even socially, you see that just people are on a different level when you have a much wider pool.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the best things I saw, because that pushes you to be better, right? It goes back to surrounding yourself with, people better than you all the time. Right. And when you're in a situation like that, you have a choice of either not doing that or trying to surround yourself with those people and push yourself to be better. And I think that's what it did for me.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think some people get in that environment and just think, this isn't for me, this is too hard. And other people get in the environment and think it's awesome and then try to figure out how to become that good.
I don't want to paint the picture that I was some awesome college student, because my first semester was a complete disaster. I was on academic probation. I almost got kicked out. It was not good, and I had to have a realization after that first semester when I came home on Christmas break that things needed to change and I needed to refocus. And that's what I did.
Was that a conversation with your parents?
It was, yeah. It was really a conversation with my dad. Back then they used to send you your grades in the mail after you took your finals. And I remember coming home for Christmas, and I remember the day the grades came. And I remember opening them and thinking, wow, I really did not do well.
Yeah.
And when I say not do well, like I failed most of the classes. I think I had like a 0.6 or something like that. And I remember sitting with my dad, who literally just said, you've got some goals in your life that you've set for yourself, and you're kind of at like this pivotal point in your life to make a decision whether or not those goals are going to become your reality or whether you're going to give up on those goals. And like just that conversation with him was like, I knew I had to make a change at that point.
Right.
And so I just decided, once again, it's just laser focus on where I wanted to go in my life. And so I quit drinking. Like I didn't have another drink for 3.5 years while I was in college. I stopped partying pretty much. I mean, I still had a large friend group and still did a lot of fun things, but it was about getting done in time and about doing it the right way for me.
Way more focused.
Yeah, absolutely.
I remember when I set goals for myself, I was training to enter the military at some point in time, and I wanted to serve at a high level, and I was training very hard to do that. And I remember my friends would go to the bars, and I would be carrying cinder blocks and a ruck and like whatever I could to get uncomfortable past the bars at night while everyone's just getting hammered. I was like focused on however many miles I needed to carry that cinder block for, or whatever I was rucking. But it's amazing when you are passionate about doing something and you find that purpose and you kind of like dial into that and you decide that just nothing's going to get in your way. I think you just like, there are certain life things that can get in your way, but as much as you can control it, you're not going to allow anything to get in your way or slow you down from those goals.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that like you would pass the bars at night rucking, right, to make yourself better for what's coming, because I would pass the bars at night coming home from either like the library or somewhere out studying, because I wasn't an awesome student. I had to work hard. I had to like memorize everything. And so my buddies would be out at the bars or out partying, and I would walk past them on my way home at night, But at the end of the day, I don't really feel like I missed anything. I spent my time doing that the first semester. I got it out of my system and I moved on.
Right.
So
it's interesting. I think while the results are wildly different, I think me and you are very similar, like in this phase. I'm sure at the time I thought about missing out, but I didn't really care. I knew my goals were way bigger than that.
Right.
And looking back, I certainly didn't miss anything. Like at the time, you might feel like, all right, am I making the right decision or not? I don't think I questioned it that much, but looking back, absolutely no doubt in my mind, there's nothing that I could have been doing in that bar that I wish I was doing versus what I was doing. Like there's nothing that would have changed. I remember I had a buddy, it was in the winter, and I had him turn on it was actually my roommate. They were all getting ready to go out, and they were like pre-gaming, they were drinking and stuff like that. And they were like, hey, you coming out? I was like, no. I was like, but I need your help with something. He was like, what? And I needed him to basically spray me down with a hose. And I was like doing all this other stuff and getting ready to go for like a 6-mile run in like 30-something degree weather, and I wanted to be soaking wet before it. I remember he like had a beer in his hand and had the hose and was just laughing, just dying laughing when he was spraying me. They went off to the bars and I went off on my run. But I'll just, those are some memories that I won't forget.
You were pretty hardcore, man.
Yeah. I had a lot of catching up to do. I was not stellar at anything. So, I mean, it was just hard work kind of replaces that. So you end up kind of getting squared away and doing better in college. You're focused. You have a purpose. Is there any like prep for the military that you have, like, or do you just get out of college and you're in, like, or you enlist or go through some officer training or whatever? What does that look like?
Between my junior and senior year in college, I attended Officer Candidate School for the Marine Corps.
Okay.
So I had, going back, you remember my dad said he encouraged me to become an officer in the military, and I thought, well, if I'm going to do that, I guess I'll go be a pilot, right? And that's what I tried to do, and I competed. We had a few slots across the entire state of Pennsylvania for officer candidates to go the flight route. And so I took the flight exam, I took the flight physical, competed for them, did physical fitness, all of that stuff. And I actually got a flight slot So I was off to become a pilot in the Marine Corps. And so I went to officer candidate school between my junior and senior year, completed that. I came back to my senior year in college, completed that, and it was commissioning day in the Marine Corps, and I declined my commission in the Marine Corps.
That's a big deal. Like, I would assume probably to become a pilot is pretty coveted in the Marine Corps. Like, there's a lot of people that want to do that.
There's a lot of people, and there's few opportunities. So I had one of those opportunities, and looking back, I feel a little bad that I took that away from somebody else, and then I didn't end up taking it. But I still believe it was the right decision to not do that.
What caused that decision? Where was your mind at?
My mind was in a couple different places. One was on a woman who I eventually married. The second was that it didn't actually align with my goals. So remember, my goals were to serve in the military, do some amazing things, and then ultimately go to work for the government, right? And so to become a pilot in the Marine Corps, I was looking at a significant amount of time after I completed flight school. And by then, you're getting out of the Marine Corps at 10, 11, 12 years. Does that make sense at that point? And now am I close to the age of cutoff to not get into the federal government or do the other things I want to do? So it just didn't align neatly to what I wanted to do. Yeah. And I just made a decision that it wasn't the right thing at the right time, and I just declined the commission.
Where did you go from there? What was your next step?
The next step was to enlist in the Army. I mean, it was, a couple months later, but it didn't take very long that, my wife and I got married, but I decided to enlist in the Army.
Was there any draw to being on the ground more than in the air?
Yeah, absolutely. There was for me. The whole pilot thing was cool. Top Gun was a movie back then. Everybody watched that, right? And, everybody's like, oh, wow, you're going to be a pilot. But ultimately, I wanted to do ground operations, right? Special operations had always appealed to me. And I knew that if I was going to go in the Army, I had to try to get to special operations because, I knew people in that world. They were great people, and they always said, once again, you want to be surrounded by the best. You got to get to special operations. So that was my mind. And when I enlisted, I enlisted on a Ranger contract, which essentially says hey, if you get through basic training, you get through your advanced school, you get through airborne school, we will give you an option to go to selection to become a Ranger, right? And it's a huge risk because you could get hurt at any point along the way, and then you're just at the needs of the Army and you get sent wherever. But it ultimately worked out. So
you had to go through a number of schools before you even get the chance to go through selection to become a Ranger.
Right.
And we're talking about the Ranger Regiment, right?
That's correct.
There's a difference between the leadership school, the Ranger school, and then the Ranger Regiment. In the Ranger Regiment, did you go through the Ranger school as well?
I did not.
Okay. Because I know the Ranger, you might still have some leaders that go through both, right? But the Ranger Regiment ended up being essentially a Tier 1 operations group in these wars that we were having after 9/11. It was a pretty coveted, a pretty awesome place to be.
Yeah, I think correctly. I think the regiment, it was Tier 2. There were other units that were Tier 1 that, eventually I got to later on in my career. It was before 9/11 when I got to the regiment. It was, 96.
What did you know about other special operations groups when you were making the decision to go in the Army and potentially become a Ranger? Because at this time, there's way less information about these groups at that time. There's SEALs, there's Green Berets, which are also in the Army. There's pararescue. There's other things that are around and maybe either known or not known. But what was your knowledge of other groups, and then what was your pull more towards the Ranger?
Yeah, my knowledge was pretty limited at the time. I knew the Rangers because I had a friend who was there, and that was probably what caused me to go that route.
Got it.
I was also familiar with the SEALs, but I have hated sand my entire life, and so that was probably the biggest reason I wasn't going to go to the SEALs. I just don't like sand.
That'd be a bad
little did
place
I
to be.
know that I was still going to be covered with sand,
right,
elsewhere in the Army. So. And then, I was aware of Marine recon and those sort of things, but I didn't really learn about, the Tier 1 units until I got into the Army and got into that world.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned sand because you think about it, even Marine, everything is sand. There's sand everywhere. That's great. So you make the decision to go in. You understand there's some level of risk that you may not even make it to the Ranger selection in case of injury or anything like that. So now you've been through officer candidate school, so you already have this taste of the military. When you're in the Army now, was there any like culture shock getting into the military before selection? Like, was there any surprises, or were you like, this is exactly where I want to be and you can't wait to get to selection?
Yeah, I think it was where I needed to be. I don't know if it's where I wanted to be, but it was exactly where I needed to be at that time. And officer candidate school in the Marine Corps was probably the first real physical mental challenge that I had as a young man growing up. But it completely set me up for success, I think, going into the Army and those schools. Like, basic training, I think I was a leadership graduate. It really wasn't challenging for me. And I just found like that school and my next school to be just something I had to do to get through them. Yeah.
From officer candidate school, assuming that was fairly challenging physically, what did you learn about how to get through some of those challenges? Like, was there any point, not that you were going to quit or anything, but was there any point where you're like, man, this sucks, this is very hard, and then you kind of learned how to work around that in your head? Was that an officer candidate school, or did you not really get to that point until selection?
Yeah, officer candidate school I think was more mental than it was. Like, it was still physically challenging, but I think I was in decent enough shape for that not to be what was my hardest challenges. My hardest challenges were more the mental aspect of it, but pushing through those. And I think everybody has those, like that's part of their job, is to put that stress on you and to make it mentally challenging as well. So
there is, I believe it's called RASP now, but at the time you're going through, it's called RIP, the Ranger Indoctrination Program.
Yeah, that's correct.
What did that look like as far as timeline, and then what sort of challenges did you have to face?
The whole purpose of the program is a weed out program, right? It is to put you under significant physical, mental stress, to try to pull out from you your true character and who you really are and how you're able to operate with others. And are you somebody that they want to have on their team, right? That is the whole purpose of that selection process. I just remember graduating airborne school, and they literally show up at your graduation and they call you out of formation, and they throw your duffel bag on a truck, and that truck drives away, and then they just put you in formation. You start running like you're in uniform and everything, and now run about 2.5-3 miles to get to regimental headquarters where like it begins. It's just several weeks of being hungry, being tired, being wet, and just under stress and exhaustion the entire time. So like I said, the whole purpose of that is just to weed people out. Right?
Do you have any idea or recollection of like how many guys started whatever class you were in, and then how many graduated, or a typical attrition rate of that program?
I don't know the exact numbers. I would say probably 80 of us started. High 20s probably graduate, somewhere in there.
So that's, as far as attrition, that's right along, again, this is a very general statement, but that's right along the lines of like a BUDS program. Like you have 100 people start, and maybe like 25 from that class will finish or something like that.
Now, BUDS is certainly a longer program. There's much more technical
6
stuff.
6 months, 3 phases.
Right, yeah. So I wouldn't compare it to that. Like this is, I can't remember, RIP, I think it was 4 weeks at the time I went through it. So it's much shorter, but it's very intense. Like it is literally no sleep, no eat, for those 4 weeks, right? And it's just constant physical exertion, but there's also mental challenges tied in there constantly. Right. So it's determining how you can work with a team under these conditions, and then, just don't quit. Right?
Yeah. As an officer, are you largely held to a higher level and put in charge of some of those evolutions?
So remember, I enlisted in the Army.
Oh, that's right.
So I declined my commission in the Marine Corps, and I enlisted in the Army, so I was not an officer.
Okay. So that might have been to a benefit a little bit in this process. Not that it would make it easy.
So the officers went through their own program.
Okay.
I can't remember what that was called. ROPE, Ranger Orientation Program. So the officers went through that. So RIP was primarily for junior enlisted folks.
Okay, that makes sense. So you don't go through with officers. You don't go through. Okay, interesting. And that actually makes sense, because then when I hear about BUDS, they're like, it's a unique training where the officers and the enlisted go through together. That would make sense. Cool. Awesome. So that, needless to say, it's a very difficult program. And then if you get selected from that, there's probably a number of other schools that you have to go through and train. Are you immediately in the regiment after that selection process, or do you have to go through other schools first to actually get in.
Yeah, if you make it through that selection process, you basically earn your scroll. You're in the regiment. You're either in one of the battalions or regimental headquarters, and then your life just sort of begins as living the regimental ranger life.
Do you get to choose what battalion you go to?
I think at the time there were options, but it ultimately comes down to the needs of the regiment.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
What time period is this roughly?
96.
Okay, so 96.
Yeah.
It's relative peacetime. Again, I don't know what stuff's going on that's not in the public eye, but relative peacetime. This is pre 9/11. What was your regiment lifestyle at this point? Like, what did it look like being in one of those units?
I mean, certainly fast paced. You live at that time on sort of a regimental readiness sort of cycle. So you're either ready to, like, if you're the regimental battalion who's ready to go to war, like, you are war ready. You're living a 1 hour recall to get to work. You're not taking leave. You're just constantly ready to be called to go to wherever. If you're in like a training cycle, that's what you're doing. You're training. And then if you're on like a recovery cycle, that's when you're taking leave. That's when you're going to get married. That's when you're having, trying to plan your kids the right way. It's very fast paced. It's an interesting lifestyle. It's tough on families. Like, you're gone a lot. You're training a lot. We, at that time, we all had pagers, all had beepers, right? Like, most people don't even know what they are anymore, but we had to carry those around. And, you might be out at dinner with your wife and having a conversation, and your pager goes off, and you don't know what it is. You just know you got to go.
Yeah.
And, not to over glorify it, because a lot of times you get to work and it's nothing, right? It was like, hey, we got everybody here. We're running a test, right? Could everybody report on time?
Yeah.
Could it, and then they let you go, send you back home. Right. But sometimes those things just wear on family life, right? And that's tough on a spouse to get to know, like, she might be second fiddle whenever you're on, whenever you're on RR1 status. So those sort of things wear on them, just being away from home. But like during that time, 96, like the regiment had just come out at, like, 93 was Somalia, right? So, there were a lot of lessons learned. So we were constantly trying to improve. Bosnia was going on. So we were hunting, a lot of the war criminals in Bosnia and things like that. So there was constant, like, churn, and there were constant things happening in the world that a lot of people just don't know are happening, right?
Right.
So you're constantly training, constantly jumping, constantly, just trying to get better.
Right.
And waiting for that call.
Yeah, and then we, fast forward a few years, 9/11 happens. And, I don't think anyone really, again, speaking from the public eye, I don't think anyone really was ready for that or like expected that to happen. So I would imagine in the military, everything changes after that. What was going through your head on 9/11?
I just knew that everything changed. Like, everything changed at that point. I knew everybody was going to go to war, and that's exactly what happened.
You lived relatively close to New York, correct? Like, had you ever been in the city or have any like closer ties to the city itself?
No, not really.
But so just as an American, you're just simply fired up and like, this is what you've been training for to respond to something like this.
I think we all asked, like, how could this happen? Like, how, who would want to do this? Why would you want to do this? And at that time, I worked in intelligence. So even in the Ranger Regiment, I did intelligence works. And I knew of bin Laden because, we had situations in 98, we had the Khobar Towers, we had, some other activities that he was involved with. And to learn that, like, that's where it was coming from, I guess, when you were in my position, you just wonder why this was allowed to happen in our own country. And it just created, resolve, I guess. Like, it was time to get after it and go take care of things.
I know a majority of what you did in your career after that, I mean, it would be way too much to even touch the surface of on this podcast, but I'll just assume there were multiple deployments and you guys stayed very busy for the next handful of years after that.
Yeah, and, it's weird because I took a weird turn after that, and I actually had a deployment to the Pentagon. So I had the opportunity to serve around, the senior leadership of the Department of Defense. So Donald Rumsfeld was the Secretary of Defense, and Paul Wolfowitz was the deputy, and General Myers was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and I was assigned to their security details. And at that point, I had the opportunity to go from like this tactical decision making, this fast paced environment to now see how wars are fought and how, like, listening to what strategic decisions are being made. And it was just a different opportunity to go, do that detail and move away from that. But 9/11 just, from a special operations perspective, it was go time for everybody. Right. And, I've lost a lot of people during that time and a lot of friends and, our neighbors. I won't go into all that, but like a lot of people.
When you're operating in the regiment, I would assume to some degree, there's a lot of things that are happening, a lot of decisions that get made where it may be harder to understand those decisions. Whereas if you're at the Pentagon and you're around those people that are making the decisions, you get to see the bigger picture and the strategy behind all of this. Was that something that you were able to pick up on, and any leadership lessons out of that, of like maybe some ways to be a good leader, or without naming names, like bad leadership that you witnessed?
I can't say I witnessed bad leadership, and obviously I didn't have the opportunity to be in every conversation, but you certainly overhear things or you see things, and you certainly see at that level, like at the Secretary of Defense level, like a cabinet level person leading the Department of Defense, or the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, right, the highest ranking member of the military. And you're around these people and you see the struggles they have with what's happening and how it's working, with their emotions and those sort of things. Like, they're human beings. And I think we often forget that when we watch them on, CNN or Fox News. It's just like, it's just a robotic decision. And they struggle with their decisions, but ultimately I think they're making the decisions for the greater good. And, it's an interesting perspective to be able to see that where from my eyes, right?
For sure.
It's certainly interesting.
You've probably learned a lot being in high stakes environments and elite teams and being in that position about making decisions. Do you have any like policy or process for decision making, especially when there's risk behind it?
No, I don't think I have a policy or process. I want to have as much information as I can. I want to be decisive. I want to make a decision and then move forward. And if I need to pivot based on that decision, I'll do that. So, if you wait too long for all the information, you just won't make a decision.
Right.
And, failure to decide is probably worse than making the wrong decision.
Right.
So no decision, right, is worse.
I've definitely been taught that by a mentor of mine who was a Navy SEAL, is, there's three types of leaders that make good decisions, bad decisions, and no decisions. And no decisions are by far the worst. Right. Because if you just make a decision, even if it's a bad one, you at least know you're heading in the wrong direction and you can correct and start heading. But no decisions, you're just sitting there. You can't do anything. We see that in real estate where, everyone knows analysis paralysis, right? Yep. And they just sit there and don't ever take action or don't ever decide. And then eventually, it's been 3 years and they still haven't bought the first rental property or made the first loan or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
So you served for 13 years in the military?
That's correct.
What was your decision like to get out of the military? Because you have all this activity, there's all these things going on in the world. You're operating at one of the highest possible levels that you could operate on. And then you decide to get out around 13 years. What was your mindset at that point?
There were a lot of things going on. So it took a toll on my personal life. There was one point I was away from my wife for 16 months. So like, that is a massive stressor on a marriage, right? And
did you have kids?
We did not have kids at the time,
right,
but it was still like a massive stressor. Right. And I think my last year of active duty, I was 273 days TDY. So I was gone a lot. And I just think that played into, I want to move to the next phase of my plan, right? Mm-hmm. And the next phase of my plan, right, if you remember back from my junior year of high school, was to get into the federal government, right? To get to one of those jobs. So when I made that move, I was fortunate, and I ended my military career at a Tier 1 unit doing, some unique niche work that I basically was offered a job to come to the government side and work as a federal government employee still doing high-risk operations worldwide. And so it was a relatively easy transition because I just achieved my goal. right?
Yeah,
Like
that's pretty awesome.
that was my life dream to get there and to do that, and that's what I did.
What was the last day like? The day you were leaving, like the military base for the last time? Was it impactful emotionally after everything you had just been through? Like, what was your mental state at that point when you were leaving?
Yeah, I think there's always like emotions going through your mind. Some good, it's a bittersweet sort of situation, but I was so relieved to be going where I was going that it was a whole new world for me. And it wasn't the last time I was going to leave a military installation, right? Like,
that makes sense.
I still go back this day sometimes to those installations. And
yeah, I guess that's good. I look at it as like, man, it's 13 years with your brothers and in those environments and getting forged in those experiences that you guys had. And then that last day, I just couldn't even imagine what that would feel like. But if you're leaving that last day to then go pursue your ultimate dreams that you've had for many years, and you could still make a difference and make an impact in largely the same communities, then that's probably just awesome. It's like graduating to get your master's.
Yeah. Now, when I retired in 2023 from the government, then there was certainly an emotional sort of challenge to me. Yeah.
So 26 years total service to the federal government. I will assume that, so 13 years in the military, the 13 years service to the federal government, I will assume that we can't go into detail with what you were doing there.
No, we can't talk too much about it. I mean, you could certainly ask me questions about, leadership or things like that to surround that, but we can't go into detail about it.
Awesome. So let's back up a little bit. I do want to talk about, did you have kids when you were exiting the military?
So, I had my son in 2004 and my daughter in 2007. Yeah. So so remember, like I left active duty in 2004 and then I went to work. I was still at a tier 1 unit as a civilian for 5 years.
Got it. Yeah. What was your financial ambitions? Because obviously you eventually have got into real estate investing and hard money. And I could talk about the military and other service for hours. Like I love talking about that. Did you have financial ambition, or were you investing while you were in the military or thinking about these investments, or just focused on service at the time?
I certainly didn't know much about investing at the time. All I knew was like we had the TSP, which is essentially the government's version of a 401k, and there's always encouragement to feed that, right? So that's what I did most of my career. And I fed that up until, the financial crisis, 2008. And I watched it lose half its value overnight. And I was just sort of shocked at that point, and I knew that I probably needed to do something different.
Obviously, you've went to college, you have this job, you're getting paid well in the job, and then you're putting money into your 401k, which is what everyone always tells you to do. And then you get to the financial crisis around 2008-ish, and you see your 401k cut in half or obliterated in some sense.
Right.
So is that what attracted you to investing? Or like to looking at different alternatives of either saving or growing money?
Yeah, it was a little bit of a wake-up call for me. So I knew something was weird. Like my wife and I, we bought our first home in like 2004, and I can remember the realtor taking us to homes that I knew we couldn't afford. Like the realtor taking us to like $700,000-$800,000 homes, and I'm like, this is not what we're asking you to show us. Oh, well, you can get approved for this. Don't worry. And I just knew something was wrong in the market. Right. I didn't know what it was. Right. Like I wasn't a real estate investor at the time. I just knew things were weird.
Right.
And then when 2008 happened, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense now why this is happening.
Yeah.
But when I saw my 401k go in half, I just knew my wife was a stay-at-home mom with our kids at this point. So I was the sole income bringer, right, or earner, and I just knew that I needed to make some sort of change. So it like forced me to educate myself in different ways of investing money.
And then did you have any resources around you, like other investors around you that you could lean into, or did you have to just sort of take it on yourself to find different options?
I didn't know anybody at the time. It was all on myself. I was YouTube University and Dave Ramsey and all that kind of stuff, trying to figure it out.
What led you to real estate specifically? Was it like Bigger Pockets or something? Or
yeah, I think, I was listening to Dave Ramsey one day. I was driving to work on a commute in, and some caller called in who, was a guy my age, mid-30s, lays out his financial plan for Dave, and Dave, as he normally does, goes into a rant and just starts ripping this guy apart. And as Dave is yelling at this guy, I think he's yelling at me because it's the same sort of situation, right? Like, I am not focused. I am not building a financial path for my wife, my family, for our future. And so, like, I know I need to make a change, and I start just doing more research. And obviously, Rich Dad, Poor Dad was a huge impact on my life. I know a lot of people say that, and it's kind of cliche, but it was, right? When I read that book, it was, okay, now I kind of know what I need to do, and I started pursuing real estate more. And that's when I, started buying properties.
Interesting. Are you still traveling a lot at this time, or are you mostly stateside?
Oh, no, I'm traveling a lot.
Yeah. So how are you finding these deals, or how are you building the relationships? How are you going about, let's just talk about specifically your first property. I always love understanding how people just get their foot in the door.
Yeah.
What did that look like for you?
First of all, I probably completely did it totally wrong. I didn't know what I didn't know, but I knew that I wanted to buy a rental property. And, Bigger Pockets had just come out. So I just started listening to them. They were like, oh, you got to buy multifamily. So I figured I got to buy multifamily. So I bought a duplex, right? Small multifamily. I bought it all my own cash that I had saved up, and then I fixed it up using all my own cash, right? And I just didn't know any better. I didn't know about private lenders at the time, and that's what I did. But I ended up refinancing that and pulling a bunch of capital back out, and that's when a light bulb clicked in my mind. It's like, wow, this can work. And if I would have used private capital, I wouldn't have had to burn through all of mine to do that. So then I started using a private lender to purchase my next properties.
Where were you buying these?
I was buying them in upstate New York.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So where were you living?
We were living in Northern Virginia.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were living in Northern Virginia and you were buying in upstate New York. Is that because you were familiar with that area? You had ties to that area? What was the...
Yeah, so I was familiar with it. It was, an area close to where I grew up. When I say close, an hour and a half away, but it was where we went as kids, and it was just where we went to the closest shopping mall. It was the closest sort of city, I guess, to our town. Mm-hmm. So when I started looking for properties, obviously I started looking in Northern Virginia, and nothing made sense, right? Like, I couldn't get anything to cash flow. I couldn't get anything to, make sense. And I started looking at different sort of tertiary markets around the country. I did the whole Kansas City thing and right. Midwest and all that, Florida. And ultimately I decided on upstate New York. And people always wonder why, because it's not, it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
But it did to me at the time. And the numbers made sense. I could, they underwrote well. It was a cash flow market, which was what I was looking for to add income. And so I just pulled the trigger on my first one there.
Did you have a property manager handle the landlording for you? Yeah. Did you have a GC? Like, were you doing rehabs too, or were they?
I was, yeah. So I was buying them all like value add, and I would travel up there and go look for the properties. Go find them, buy them, and then pretty much have my property manager do the rehab for me.
Yeah. How were you finding them through like a real estate connection? But were you marketing or anything else?
I wasn't. No. As a matter of fact, during that time, like I bought, I think 3 or 4 of them off of like the HUD Home Store. Like, nice. Back then, like there were still a ton of foreclosures out there and things like that. And I would just buy HUD homes. Right. I sold one last week actually that I bought for $14,000 and I sold it for $150,000. Owner financed it and just, I hold the note. So, it was just crazy. Like I was buying these properties.
What were they renting for roughly?
$1,500. Well, I mean, like that one ultimately got to $1,500. It was probably renting at the time for $1,000 a month or something.
Man, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So that's still, even though it's kind of a random, well, to me, it's a random area. You're doing this remotely. You put your team in place. Did you have the property manager and GC relationships before you started investing, or did you kind of just figure that out as you go?
Well, I mean, before I bought the first property, I had called up there and interviewed a few property managers and tried to find who felt like was the right fit, and ended up going with him. Yeah.
Awesome. That's cool. So you have your team in place, because I think we see investors will try to buy like in Richmond, but they don't know anyone and they don't want to hire anyone or spend any money, and they like live in Alaska, and we're like, okay, or typically they call us a year after, like they've tried that, and then we're like, oh, you you didn't know anyone, you don't have any, maintenance people, any relationships, any realtors, they're like, no, now it's too hard. I'm like, well, go figure.
The team was critical. The team was absolutely critical.
So you learn leverage, and you've learned to leverage other people's money and stuff like that. And now you're scaling this rental portfolio. That is right before COVID.
Right.
And then we hit COVID. Do you still have this rental portfolio going into COVID in New York?
I did. Yeah. I had 18 rentals when COVID hit. And some of those were multifamily.
Right. What did that feel like? I mean, specifically speaking about the rules and regulations and how New York was as a state.
It was not good, right? I mean, I don't think COVID helped any landlords anywhere, really. But,
right.
I mean, in terms of New York, almost immediately. So, first of all, like my portfolio of rentals, I would say, 70% of it were Class C properties. Some of those multifamily units were 1 bedroom, 1 bath. So, they're already a transient sort of unit, but now my Class C tenants don't go to work. They don't have jobs, and they're told they don't need to pay rent. So it became a challenging time during COVID. I always felt fortunate that I made sure that I had enough liquidity to cover challenging times. Several of my properties I owned outright by then, and I didn't have a lot of leverage on them, which I think was also a saving sort of grace for me.
I can imagine, too, with sort of the occupation that you have, and then you have COVID going on, and then you have rentals that are in New York. How are you managing the whole operation as far as like stresses? Because you have kids, you have a wife, like there's a lot of things going on in your life at this point. How are you managing your stress, or have you learned to manage stressful situations in a certain way due to, your experience in high risk situations?
I mean, I just feel like stress has always been in my life, and I've just had to deal with it. So, exercise has always been a way for me to deal with stuff. And I still today try to make sure I'm getting in something every morning and deal with stress.
Outside of growing rentals, what other things were you looking into as far as real estate investing? Did you ever try to get into, obviously you're a lender now, so that started at some point, and we'll get there. Yeah. But did COVID and having these properties kind of change your mindset on being a landlord?
I think before COVID, so in like 2019, I started really trying different things in the real estate world. So I started investing in syndications, large, hospitality resort type properties, large multifamily, just as limited partner in those syndications. So I invested in like 5 of those in 2019 to do something different, diversify my portfolio. And that's also when I did my first 2 private loans in 2019. So it was before COVID that I actually made a decision to like just diversify a little bit. I hadn't quite made the decision yet to start selling. That decision came, I think, during COVID and then right after COVID.
Interesting. That makes sense. So you were diversifying, and then after the pain from COVID might have been like, hey, let's go a little bit further down these
It wasn't
roads.
Only just the pain. It was also like, even though that was a cash flow market when I got into it, it became an appreciating market after COVID, right? And now all of a sudden I've got all this equity tied up in a bunch of rentals that is not giving me the return that I think it should be. And, I was faced with sort of 2 options. Do I refi and re-leverage all these properties and pull that capital out? Or do I sell? And my decision was to sell and to take that capital and actually not 1031 it, to pay the capital gains and move that capital into my business, which I now lend. And that was sort of a strategic decision I made at the time to do that. And you'll hear people all the time like, oh, never sell a rental, never sell a rental. Right. Well, I had 18 in a market that I no longer want to be in. Yeah. And I also had 18 that had appreciated to the point that my return on that equity didn't make sense anymore. Right. They had run their course and they were strong cash flowing properties, but now I needed to adjust. Right. And that's what I chose to do.
Yeah. I mean, it makes perfect sense. Let's talk about the syndications for a little bit, and then we'll get into the lending. The syndications always interested me. They scare me because I'm not in control. Right. Yeah. And especially as a owner of a property management company, I can see some of the stuff that could go wrong if things aren't managed properly. Yeah. Like we get a lot of phone calls, right? That's not any knock on syndications. Just my personal opinion is it's harder for me to get into those when I've developed a system of controlling real estate, right? And operations. But I've heard awesome things about syndications, really high returns and great experiences. And I've heard bad things too. Now you invested in 5 right before COVID. How did those work out for you? What was your experience investing in syndications?
Yeah. So first of all, I think you hit the nail right on the head with not having control as a limited partner, right? And you don't. And you don't necessarily have any security either. So you're taking on huge risk jumping into syndications. And as long as you know that, and as long as you try to, evaluate the GP and underwrite the property and try to understand what you're getting into, you're trying to mitigate your risk. But at the end of the day, you are at risk, right? I stopped doing syndications and I have not gotten into any more since then. So I've had 4 pay out. I have 1 that is still active and it's still paying. Some of them turned out to be very, I don't want to say lucrative, but returns were good and they paid out well and they finished. We have 1 now that has been going on longer than we expected. Interest rates go up. It changes the the underwriting on these things. So hopefully it will still work out in the long run. They're still continuing to pay my preferred return, which I'm happy with.
Right.
But I am on top of watching what's happening with the asset and how it's performing. And
Right.
I think I got into one of the syndications, which was a hospitality wedding resort type venue in November of 2019, if I remember. So COVID happened a few months later.
Right.
And in the hospitality world, it shut that business down, right? And the operator, fortunately, was able to pivot. And he knew how to pivot and still attract people on an outside, he had an ice skating rink, he had outside fire pits, all these things that he did to bring business to that venue, knowing that we couldn't be inside and have weddings, right? So he was able to pivot and still make it a value add sort of situation during that time. But yeah, COVID certainly hurt the hospitality sort of venues.
Outside of a COVID phenomenon, how are you vetting your GPs at the time, or how do you understand if someone's trustworthy or worth doing business with?
Yeah. So from the syndication perspective, most of the syndications that I invested in were people that I met through networking at that time, going to different events, looking at their past performance, talking to other limited partners who have invested with them. I was sort of in that world where I was meeting these people, looking at their deal pitch, trying to underwrite the properties. At the end of the day, I'm not sure I was always with the right people. There were some people that weren't able to come out of some of the deals they had, and I did not choose to get in those. But it's tough. I think I like to look at past performance a lot. I like to see the type of person they are and how they're treating other people. I tend to think I have a decent way of shaping a person up.
Right.
But I wouldn't say I have a book way of doing it.
Right.
I assume you have to do the same from your lending business. Yeah. You have to, for your borrower specifically, do you lend to first-time borrowers? And if so, is it just hey, I'm taking more of a risk, here's a bit of a higher rate, or is there a different way that you vet them?
Yeah, typically I do lend to first-time borrowers. And I would say sometimes first-time borrowers are your better borrowers because they're so focused on their deal, right? They got one deal and they're super focused on getting it done, and they're very communicative, and it's their first rodeo, and they want to make sure they're successful. But I also tend to try to figure out the type of person they are, right? I go to social media, I look at your social media accounts, I try to talk to other people that know you. A lot of my borrowers come by way of referral. So some of my current borrowers might refer another borrower to me.
Right.
And I think that's awesome. I love that about my business, but I certainly look at your social media. I certainly want to know who you are, where you came from, about your family. I'm not just an asset-based lender. I want to have a relationship with you, and I want it to be a long-term relationship, not just a one deal.
Awesome. When you got into lending, I would assume you found it more attractive than syndications because you have arguably more control over what happens with the money, and you have less risk. What encouraged was it again just diversification, or was there something specific that happened that drew you to be a lender?
Initially, it was diversification, and it was I knew that I had some capital sitting on the sidelines doing nothing, and I wanted to get it to work, but I didn't really want to buy another property at that time, and so I had learned about private lending. I didn't know enough about it, but I found a way to lend that money out, and I did that. But about that same time, I also met a mentor here locally who really took me under his wing and taught me everything about lending, and that just sort of completely changed my mind on where I wanted to put my money in the future.
Interesting.
And so I just started lending.
And that helped with like expedite the sales of your rentals? Like, were you like, I could, cash in this equity and put it into lending and make better returns that way?
Yeah. So after COVID, and there was so much appreciation, as I talked about before, it was sort of a no-brainer for me to liquidate that portfolio and then bring that capital into the lending side. And then also, as I got close to retiring from the government in 23, starting my lending business was a goal of mine. And previously I was lending a lot out of self-directed retirement accounts,
right,
self-directed IRAs. And now, now I'm able to do that through an LLC, and I keep, everything separate. LLC separate, right, from the self-directed accounts. But
how do you choose which one to is it just whatever money's available, or like, do you have any sort of like method of whether you do it through self-directed or your cash?
Yeah, there's a little different method. And, obviously if I'm somehow marketing from like Virginia hard money side or whatever, and the deal comes in, then I'm going to do it with Virginia hard money. I try to keep my family's IRAs, my IRAs working, and we have like the ability to do that outside of the LLC and just keep that money working. So it's not a great answer, but like, it's relatively simple for me to keep my IRAs completely separate and keep them working.
When did you start getting into networking groups? Like, when did you start building your network? Because ever since I've known you, you've been in the thick of things. Like, you're always surrounded by people. You're always at different meetup events, and people know who you are. When did networking become a thing for you?
Geez, I don't know. Networking, like I started probably going to meetups in Fredericksburg, I don't know, 2015 or so, like after I bought my first couple and I didn't know what I was doing. Right. I knew I needed to find something. So we had a couple meetups up there I would go to. I think, Jim, through that is when I, there used to be the Financial Friends Network and all that. And then,
right,
I met Jim Ingersoll and started going to his events. That's where I first met you. You say that I'm always at these events and networking, but it honestly, that is work for me. I'm an introvert. When I get into that sort of setting, it's, when I get done at night, I'm just exhausted.
Yep.
It's a lot of work for me to, just move into that setting and try to be as communicative as I can be, because I'm typically very reserved and a quiet individual.
I understand that 100%. Like, I will be exhausted at the end of the day if I have to talk to too many people. Like, I don't want to, the networking events are the hardest for me because you have to go start the conversations, especially early on when I didn't know anyone. Like, it's a little easier now because they're friends, right? And you can just go have conversations with them, but it would be brutally difficult and exhausting just for me to go like start a conversation and figure out how to keep that conversation going. I'm just not the best at it. I would much rather have like one-to-one conversations or just with my friends. So it was very hard growing the business because that's what you had to do, is go out and put yourself in these uncomfortable situations and then just build the relationships that way. So I definitely relate.
As hard as it was, we were talking about the work you got to put into networking. Like, networking became the fuel, right, really to move me forward. And people like Jim Ingersoll and Ray Ferguson and Rich Lennon, Jonathan Sile, like some of the OGs of the Richmond real estate market who built these networking events, who just push the abundance mindset, have really, sort of set the way for me and the way I want to run my business and the way I want to have that abundant mindset. So I really want to just give them the credit due for what they do and the value they bring to us every day. Yeah, and it's also challenging. I live in Fredericksburg, but most of the meetups I go to are here in Richmond, right, or Rich Lennon's out in Midlothian, or Ray Ferguson's down in Colonial Heights. Like that, the other night I drove an hour and 40 minutes to get to Colonial Heights, right? And then drive back home.
Right. And that's a later meetup, right? So you're going home late at night.
So it's definitely a lot of effort that you got to put into that.
Yeah. But that's cool. You're surrounding yourself with some great people.
Right.
And once it's done, you're kind of happy. Like, you're happy it's done, but you're also happy you did it, you know? So it always pays off to put yourself in those uncomfortable positions. And it's interesting because some of the most popular people, I shouldn't frame it that way, but I should say some very popular people in this, investing network in Central Virginia are very much introverts. I mean, Rich Lennon hosts the Ring Network. He speaks, goes all this, but he will tell you like he would rather be hiding in a corner, not talking to anyone. And same with Wendy Coles.
Yeah.
So Wendy Coles was like, showed up to her Dealmaker event, and she's like, I was hoping no one would talk to me for 3 days. I didn't want anyone to even see I was there, to notice me. And she said like something, I'm paraphrasing, but something along the end of the event, like she had all these new friends and everyone was talking to her and she was so glad she went. And now I think she's speaking at the event this year, which is just insane.
I remember when Wendy came the first time, and now she's speaking next week. So it's crazy.
My father, on the other hand, I don't think he'll talk to anyone and everyone and have a great time, and I think he wants more of it. And I'm like, it's not me for sure. Okay, so now you're lending. You are essentially, what's going on here is you've decided to be a lender. It's called Virginia Hard Money.
Correct.
And then, but it's more like, how would you differentiate a hard money lender versus a private money lender?
It's funny that my business is named Virginia Hard Money because I don't really consider myself a hard money lender. I think most hard money lenders are purely asset based. I think they bring in institutional capital to lend, and I don't do either of those things, right? Like I develop relationships with my borrowers. I certainly underwrite the property and the deal, but I don't bring in institutional capital. Most of the capital is all mine or like a small group of close friends and family. Yeah.
Are there any asset types that you prefer to lend on? Like, are you only doing single family homes? You're doing single family, multifamily, commercial. What's kind of your game plan for that as a lender?
I really like new builds. If I can do new builds, I don't get a ton of requests for them, but I do like new builds. And then obviously single family homes, like from a rehab perspective or a BRRRR, I like single family. And I think a lot of that goes back to my own investing days when I had my own properties and I saw the value of a single family home versus some of the other properties I owned.
Yeah, and you have the borrowers, I assume they will be wanting anywhere from like 6 to 12 month terms, and that's what they're expecting, and you're funding the purchase and the rehab, and then the borrowers are paying you some interest payment, and then at the refi or the sale of the property is when you and your underlying lenders get paid.
Yeah, that's correct. Most of my loans are written at 6 months, but I would, even in this market today, we typically extend. So I think most loans probably go 8 to 9 months.
Yeah. What was it like when you were first lending versus now? What are some of the differences from a business perspective or an operational perspective? When you were first lending, I assume like there's a lot of mistakes, there's a lot of tuition. It might just be like some handwritten paperwork or something. And now you are likely way more squared away. You've been doing it for 7 years. That's a lot of experience in today's market where a lot of lenders have just gotten started. You go to these meetup groups and almost everyone is a lender now.
Yeah.
And that's fine. That's okay. Like that's cool. They have some capital, but a lot of them might just have some capital to use and then understand they can also borrow other people's capital. You've been doing this for 7 years and probably have some good systems and processes in place. What are some of the differences between you when you first started and then how you're lending today?
Yeah. Well, when we say 7 years, I started lending in 2019. I did 2 loans, right? So let's take that year away, and then let's take COVID away. So really, my experience is probably more like 4.5 to 5 years. Okay, just let's not blow my experience up here. But I have done several hundred loans, and I will say from the beginning till now, my processes have certainly become sharper. But I just got done having a conversation with my son 2 days ago about, hey, my processes need to be better.
Right.
Please help me look at my processes and help me make them better. So I'm always trying to improve my processes. I will say, I have my attorney on speed dial. I have, our documents are locked in. My underwriting is pretty locked in. Definitely over whatever time from 2019 till now, those processes have become much better, stronger, and I think my lending business is a risk mitigation business ultimately, right? So I'm constantly looking at ways to mitigate risk, and my mentor taught me so many different ways to do that and to try to create deals differently or shift things here and there. So it's come full circle, and it's certainly moving in the direction I want it to move now, but it's definitely different than it was in 2019. Right. I think those first 2 deals I did in 2019, I used like the borrower's title company to generate documents. I probably wired money wrong. It was just not done the right way.
What are can you give us an example of like a way that you might mitigate risk as a lender?
Certainly, like skin in the game with my borrowers. I don't do 100% financing as some borrowers do. I think it's very risky, and I think those who do it will get burnt. It's just a matter of time. So, like skin in the game for my borrowers is always something I'm looking for. Obviously, that first lien position on the property, sometimes cross collateralization, to bring more security to the deal. Various ways to mitigate risk.
Where do you find your borrowers? At these meetup groups?
Yeah, I think through networking at meetup groups. And I think, like I said before, a lot of my borrowers will refer new borrowers to me who are friends of theirs and in their networks. And, if it's typically a good match if my borrowers are bringing new borrowers to me. But I also, I have a website. I do market a little bit, not the way I should, but I've got a Facebook page and all that kind of stuff. So people find me out there somehow. They Google and find me and call me.
Right. What do you see yourself buying more property in the future?
Possibly, if the right deals are there. Yeah, not in upstate New York. And there's nothing wrong with upstate New York. It's just not where I want to be as an investor. Right. And I do think about owning some property in the future here in Virginia or wherever.
What else are you getting into? Are you just more of like growing the lending business, or do you have any other endeavors like within real estate or finance or anything like that you're looking forward to in the future?
I mean, obviously, like personal finance is huge to me. Like, and I think that's something that I try to work with my family and teach my kids personal finance and just help them understand how money works and how it flows and the velocity of money and just moving money. And so I'm focused on those sort of things, but in the real estate world, I'm focused on lending right now. It's really like, I don't want to, sometimes people will say, oh, you should be doing DSCR. You should be doing that. I just want to focus on my niche, and I just want to be the best at it I can be. And I want to keep my borrowers happy and just do the best I can for them as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. It says a lot about someone who can just stay focused on what they're doing. I mean, especially you with your network and your knowledge and your experiences, you could be doing a lot of different things. I used to like joke when we would go to Dealmaker, you would get a speaker that would do Airbnb arbitrage. You get a speaker who did short term. You do a speaker who did, long-term rentals, midterm, traveling nurses, all these different, flips, and I could go on and on and on, right? Commercial side of things and residential. So by the end of the 3-day conference, you're like, okay, I'm going to start 7 different businesses. And it's very hard to stay focused. So for you to be able to say like, you have these experiences and you're surrounded by people that are doing all these different things, but for you to say, I'm the private money or hard money guy, and that's what I'm going to do, and that's what I'm going to focus on is pretty awesome.
I think, in the real estate investing world, the shiny objects are everywhere, right? Mm-hmm. And you can start chasing a squirrel that way and this way, and I did that a little bit. I did the buy and hold, I did the BRRRRs, I did syndications, I did, so I experienced some of that, but I think everybody's got like an investor DNA and they know what they do best. And I just feel that lending is where I belong.
Right. In business and in real estate, what principles do you believe consistently lead to success? What do you see in the people in your network that are successful? What common traits do they have that you can identify?
They take action, number one. They know how to recognize a good deal when it's a good deal, and they move on it as fast as they can. Some of the values and traits, I would say, like honesty, integrity, communication. Communication's huge, especially for me as a lender. I want my borrowers communicating to me when there's a problem. I want it, bad news does not age well. So the sooner I know there's a problem, the sooner I can help fix that problem. When I have borrowers that I can't reach on the phone or their voicemail's full, lenders are going to start going down the worst case scenario in their mind, right? So communication is huge. And I think, for my borrowers, that's one of the biggest assets they can have is just being as transparent as quickly as possible and just communicating as often as possible.
If you were to give advice for someone who wanted to follow in your footsteps within lending and real estate, what's the first action to take for someone to get involved in these sorts of things?
I think start building your network. Not only educating yourself, but don't get paralyzed by the education piece, but know enough, but start surrounding yourself with people who are doing what you want to do. And if you can find the people who are doing what you want to do at a high level and you can get under them, that will move you ahead light years.
What's your response to people who say, I don't have any money?
I think my response would be, well, go find a deal. Right? If you can find a deal, you don't have money, there's money out there. I do think you need a little bit of money in this world to do. I think like if you're absolutely broke and you can't bring anything to the table and you've got no liquidity at all, you're a risk for me.
Right. Yeah.
There might be other lenders out there that are just purely looking at the asset and they don't care and they'll lend the money. But for me, I want you to have some liquidity. I want you to have a buffer. And I certainly would like to know you're mature enough in your investing education that you can present a deal to me and tell me why it's a good deal.
Right. Yeah. And it's one of those where like, if you really literally don't have any money, go find the deal. It's still the right answer. You just go find the deal and wholesale it.
Right.
Or like, do something to create some capital for yourself and then you can go or find a partner or something like that. Right.
Yeah. And I also think like back to personal finance, if somebody doesn't have any money at all, I start asking the question, why?
Right.
Is it because you don't put enough priority on your finances? Is it because you tend to spend your money on material items that aren't getting you, that are depreciating objects like your car or whatever? Do you have a sense of personal finance? Because I think it's important to have that if you're coming into the real estate world.
Do you have any concern that if the market shifts and you have enough money out on loans that's going to impact you? Like, do you feel safe with having a large amount of money out? Like, let's say you have 30, 40 loans out at one time, and you may not, you may have 10 or whatever, but just general, the market shifts. Does that put the lender at a more risky position than the investor themselves?
It could, and it depends how well you underwrite those. And I think if you talk to most of my borrowers, they'll say that I'm a pretty conservative lender. So I tend to underwrite pretty conservatively. I require a large down payment most of the time, or cross collateral to get to that security piece. Once again, I mitigate risk as best I can. So I can withstand a pretty significant market shift. That said, I don't want to withstand that. And my borrowers certainly don't want to withstand that because we all both want a win-win situation.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. And I love what you said about communication earlier too. I mean, that's such a key component. I've mentioned this a few times on the podcast, but there was one deal where me as a borrower, I went over my term and I would call my lender every other day and just say, hey, just went by the property. This is what's going on. Right. Hey, just went, here's some photos, here's some videos. And then I even offered, I was like, I have other rentals I can sell and get you the capital that you need if you want it back right now. Right. And that lender was like, no, you're good, man. Like, because I was communicating like every other day, sending videos, pictures and everything, making sure that he was in good hands. And when a couple months over, he knew exactly what the situation was the whole time. I got to refi and then we just did some more deals together. And that was only one that happened, but it still was like, for whatever reason, I talk to other lenders and they'll talk about how people just stop communicating and you wonder why. Like it's just so much better if you just face it, like confront it, right? Yeah, and then you have, especially someone like you, you're going to treat it like you're a part of their team.
Right.
And so instead of like bashing that person and calling the loan immediately, it's way better for you guys. You guys just operate as a team and figure out a solution.
Yeah. I mean, it's in my best interest that this works out. Right. So let's figure out how to work it out.
Are you planning to go to Dealmaker this year?
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. So what are some ways that people can find you or learn more about your company?
Probably the easiest way is just go to my website, virginiahardmoney.com. And from there, you can connect with me on the website. You can send me an email at rick@virginiahardmoney.com. Probably the easiest ways.
Awesome. Any final thoughts?
No, I just really appreciate this, Stephen. Thank you so much.
Yeah, man. I appreciate everything that you've done for our local community, but also for our nation. Their service to the country, your service to the federal government. Thank you so much. Your family's sacrifice that you guys made. Like I can't even begin to understand what that was like, especially post 9/11 and everything that you were involved with. So thank you so much for your service and sacrifice there. Thank you for your commitment to the investing community and just being a good person and showing up to these meetups and helping others find their success as well. And I appreciate you spending the time to come on the podcast with me.
Thank you, Stephen.